Now, before we get started, I just want to say that I am a huge fan of Hermes Trismegistus. However, I am not a historian to do a complete background on the Egyptian priest king, who is also known as the Egyptian god Thoth and, of course, the Roman god Mercury. However, I am a huge fan of such a transcendent figure and, of course, his related works. Despite there being some contention surrounding whether such an individual person actually existed, we cannot deny the enormous amount of influence their early works had on our society. From the hermeneutical method of research, the winged staff entwined by two serpents called the caduceus, the hermeneutical seal used in experiments, and of course, that Mercury in your household thermostat, receiving such a name due to its messenger-like ability to transition between states of matter. So consequently, we have a lot to thank when it comes to this potentially mysterious figure. Now, as another strange bridge here, the Kybalion that was published in 1908 adopted many hermeneutical themes, such as its 7 hermeneutic principles we find in its pages. The odd thing here is that the book feels a great deal like the universe secrets that were revealed, such as those in the Urantia book, and many of its perceived truths resonate with many Urantian readers. The parallel here is that its author, William Walker Atkinson, appears to check many of the boxes for the sleeping subject that created the Urantia book. Well, let's just say they checked less boxes than Wilfred Kellogg, and of course more boxes than Edgar Cayce. Of course, if you ask me. He was a prominent businessman that appeared to refine divine knowledge by unknown means, lived in Chicago around the original sleeping subject transmission of the Urantia papers between the years 1900 and 1916, and was an attorney, publisher, and of course author. As a friendly reminder, sections of the Urantia book began materializing in 1925 in a way that members themselves did not quite understand, likely greatly distancing the sleeping subject's influence at this time. This also lines up with William's 1932 death, since they likely, if previously involved at all, would have likely stopped directly transmitting by then anyways. Now, unfortunately, we do have to uncheck 2 boxes when it comes to the sleeping subject. The first one had to do with the fact that Atkinson was deeply religious. And of course, the original sleeping subject, he was kind of indifferent to the whole process behind how he was revealing all this knowledge. However, it should be noted that despite the sleeping subject initially not being interested so much in their divine gift, if we continue to follow the Kellogg prominent theory, such a non-religious stance is hard to believe due to Wilfred eventually becoming a prominent figure of the forum and, of course, publishing the Urantia book itself. It is suggested by some that William Atkinson may have been an original forum member before his passing, simply due to being actively interested in anything having to do with the occult. Now, fun stuff to speculate for sure, but simply food for thought for you guys to think about. But either way, the parallels are striking. After all, the Urantia book indicates truth is often universal, meaning that perhaps there is some distant connection to the hermeneutical philosophy and religion that reflects back upon the truths inside the Urantia book. In today's video, we will surely see a few with these 2 sets of religious works. Part 1, the primal source and the mental universe. The story of human spiritual evolution is often told as a series of disconnected chapters, much like the Colburn Bible video that we were discussing weeks earlier. But when one places the Corpus Hermeticum alongside the massive blue volume of the Urantia book, the chapters begin to read like a single cohesive epic. At the beginning of both religious texts, they both offer a staggering proposition: that the universe is not a cold, accidental machine, but a structured thought emanating from a single, incomprehensible source. In the Hermetic tradition, specifically in the Poimandres, the first book of the Corpus Hermeticum, this source is identified through a vision granted to Hermes Trismegistus. He encounters a presence called the Mind of the Sovereignty, or Poimandres, who reveals that before anything existed, there was a light, holy and beautiful, which represented the mind of God. This ancient Egyptian Greek synthesis posits that the all is mind. The universe is mental. This is the core of the Hermetic principle of mentalism, found in the later Kybalion. It suggests that the cosmos exists within the mind of the Absolute. When we turn to the Urantia book, specifically in paper 105, labeled Deity and Reality, we find a strikingly similar architectural starting point. The book introduces the concept of the I Am, a term for the theoretical self-existent God before the beginning of time and space, to even oblige in revealing that time and space are constructs for creatures of time only, with the Universal Father, God the Ultimate, and God the Absolute transcending time and space. The Urantia book authors describe this I Am as the philosophical infinity that eventually differentiates into the Trinity and the seven absolutes of infinity. The parallel here is more than just shared monoism. It is a shared description of how the one becomes the many. In Hermeneticism, the mind, nous, brings forth a word, logos, that organizes the chaotic elements into a cosmos. In the Urantia book, the Universal Father, the first source and center, acts through the Eternal Son, the second source and center, and the Infinite Spirit, the third source and center. The Infinite Spirit is explicitly described in paper 8 as the co-joint actor, or the God of Mind. Here, the Urantia book mirrors the Hermeneutic claim that the mind is the bridge between the spiritual and the material. The Urantia book states in 56.2.2 that mind is the indispensable channel of communication between spiritual and material realities, a sentiment that could have been directly lifted from the secret sermon on the mountain in the Corpus Hermeticum, where Hermes instructs Tate that the eye of the body cannot see the beauty of the good, but the eye of the mind can. Furthermore, both texts grapple with the problem of how a perfect infinite God can relate to an imperfect finite world. The hermeneutic solution is a series of emanations, lower gods, governors, and spirits that act as intermediaries. The Urantia book systematizes this to an almost bureaucratic degree. It describes a universe filled with descending suns and entities that have magisterial missions that step down the divine energy so it doesn't incinerate the lower realms. Both systems reject the notion of a distant, uninvolved watchmaker. Instead, they present a universe that is a living, breathing organism of thought, where every level of reality is a reflection of the level above it. This leads us to the most famous Hermetic maxim: as above, so below; as below, so above. While this phrase is found in the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, its spirit permeates the Urantia book. In paper 15, the 7 superuniverses, the Urantia book explains that the administration of our local universe, the way planets are grouped into systems and systems into constellations, is a pattern reflected of the central universe of Havona. As a brief example of this premise, biological cells are not the only things that can divide themselves, which is something we see in the original formation of the Holy Trinity, a phenomenon that I routinely attempt to depict with bubbles separating in my videos. The Urantia book posits that the master spirits of the seven super universes are the high-level conduits through which the divine nature is filtered into time and space, with collectively having the attributes of supreme ultimate abilities, meaning they disclose the attributes of omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence when working together, found in 16.2.4. This perfectly parallels the Hermetic seven governors, or seven rulers, mentioned in the Poimandres, who encompasses the circles of the world and whose administration is called fate. Both texts suggest that we live in a nested reality, where the laws of physics are simply the lowest frequency versions of the laws of spirit. As a fun fact here, much of our material laws on this planet were created by Christ Michael himself. Part 2. The Fragment of the Infinite. These narratives take a more personal turn when we look at the nature of the human soul. Both their Hermetic texts and the Urantia book are remarkably bold in their claim that the human mind is not just a biological byproduct, but a vessel for an actual piece of the divine. In the Hermetic tradition, this is often called the spark or the nous. The Corpus Hermeticum suggests that man is a divine being who is not to be compared with the other living creatures upon earth, but with those in heaven. Hermes tells Tate that God bestowed mind upon humans as a prize to be sought, a way for the soul to find its way back to the original source. The Urantia book takes this mystical concept and provides it with a name and a detailed function: the thought adjuster. In paper 107, Origin and Nature of Thought Adjusters, the text explains that these are literal fragments of God that indwell the human mind. They are described as mystery monitors, pre-personal spirits that come from the Universal Father to live within the mortal mind, to guide, pilot, and eventually spiritualize the human personality. In addition, we receive 7 adjutant mind spirits from our Universe Mother Spirit, who also prepares the way for the adjuster to do their ascendant work, as long as the human mind is agreeable along the way. So, of course, the parallels here are profound. In the Poimandres, the fall of man into the physical world is not described as a sin in the traditional sense, but as an immersion into the nature where the human being becomes double, mortal in body, but immortal in the essential man. This duality is the central theme of the Urantia book's anthropology. The Urantia book teaches that we are evolutionary mortals who possess a divine spark, which creates a tension between our animal instincts and our spiritual yearnings. Where the texts truly align is in the purpose of this indwelling. Hermeticism teaches that the goal of life is gnosis, the experiential knowledge of God. It is not enough to believe. One must know. This knowledge is not intellectual data, but a transformation of the self where the mind of the human merges with the mind of the divine. The Urantia book calls this process adjuster fusion. In paper 110, Relation of Adjusters to Individual Mortals, it is explained that if a human consistently chooses to follow the leading of the indwelling spirit, the two eventually become one of mind. The two eventually fuse, and the mortal becomes a permanent, immortal member of the celestial family. Both the Hermeticist and the Urantian are on a quest for deification. Not to be God in totality, but to become a godlike personality through the union of the human and divine will. This indwelling spark also serves as the internal compass for the law of vibration, mentioned in the Kybalion. Hermeticism posits that everything is in motion and that by changing one's mental vibration, one can change their state of being. The Urantia book discusses this in terms of spiritual gravity. Paper 7 explains that the Universal Father exerts a pull, a spiritual gravity, on all fragments of himself. The thought adjuster is the gravity circuit anchor within the human mind, constantly pulling the soul towards paradise. In both systems, the human being is a dynamic, vibrating entity whose ultimate destiny is to tune their frequency to the divine broadcast. The Urantia text also discusses the lowest foundational form of matter, known as the automaton, that stems directly from paradise. The journey from the earthly plane to the heart of the cosmos represents the core narrative arc for both the Hermetic seeker and the Urantia student. This process is not a sudden leap into perfection, but a rigorous structured ascent, a ladder of light that bridges the chasm between the finite and the infinite. In the Hermetic tradition, this is most vividly detailed in the Poimandres, where the soul's departure from the physical body is merely the beginning of a celestial odyssey. Hermes is taught that as the human spirit rises, it must pass through the 7 zones, or planetary spheres, each governed by one of the 7 rulers. At each gate, the soul is required to relinquish a specific earthly encumbrance. At the first sphere, the power of increase and decrease. At the third, the illusion of lust. And by the 7th, the falsehood of malice. This is a process of purgation, where the soul must unclothe itself of the lower nature to enter the 8th sphere, the realm of the fixed stars and the presence of the divine. The Urantia book offers a strikingly similar, though more industrialized and expansive version of this journey, which it calls the Ascension Scheme. In paper 47, The 7 Mansion Worlds, the text details the immediate post-mortal experience of the human soul. Upon waking in the resurrection halls, the individual finds themselves not in a misty heaven, but on the first of 7 training spheres that revolve around the headquarters of our local system. Much like the Hermetic zones, these mansion worlds serve as remedial schools. The Urantia book authors explain that the mansion world experience is a period of transition, a time of catching up on the delayed spiritual development of the flesh. If a person died with certain character flaws or residues of animal origin, they do not magically disappear. They are addressed on these worlds through education and service. The structural parallel here is almost mathematical. Both systems rely on a septenary or 7-fold progression, where the Corpus Hermeticum speaks of the 7 governors who encompass the circles of the world. The Urantia book introduces God the Sevenfold in paper 116. We learn that the Urantia book explains that because the Universal Father is too spiritually distant from a finite creature to comprehend, the universe provides 7 levels of deity manifestation. This allows the ascending mortal to climb the rungs of divinity one step at a time. The Urantia book's 7 master spirits, who preside over the 7 superuniverses, serve a function nearly identical to the Hermetic governors. They are the primary conduits through which the all filters its will into the material realms of time and space, leaving an eternal thumbprint, if you'll permit the term, on each ascender of the 7 very unique superuniverse ascension plans. This ascent is also described in both traditions as a change in vibration or substance. In the Kybalion, the principle of vibration states that nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. The difference between the physical, the mental, and the spiritual is simply a matter of the rate of frequency. To move higher is to vibrate faster. The Urantia book translates this mystical concept into the technical term Urantia. This is a state of being that is neither purely material nor purely spiritual, but a bridge between the two. As a soul progresses through the mansion worlds and eventually through the constellations and the local universe, its Urantia destiny changes. The Urantia book notes that as you ascend, you are literally being rekeyed to higher energy circuits, becoming less material and more spiritual. This echoes the Hermetic idea that the soul must be refined and enlightened to survive the higher atmospheres of the divine presence. Part 3: Existence is Experience. The narrative of the seeker in both texts is also one of regaining lost memory. In the Hermetic discourse on the 8th and 9th, the initiate describes a state of holy silence. where they begin to recognize their own divine origin, effectively remembering what they were before they fell into the world of matter. The Urantia book describes this as the spiritualization of the mind. The indwelling of the adjuster, which we discussed earlier, carries the transcript of the individual's potential. As the person ascends the Urantia worlds, the gap between their immortal memory and the adjuster's divine existential vision begins to close. The Urantia book suggests that the final stage of the local universe ascent is the fusion of the human and the divine fragment, a moment of total integration that reflects the hermetic rebirth, palingenesia, where the seeker becomes a true son of God. However, these two traditions do diverge when it comes to their view of the rest of the Master Universe. Hermeticism, reflecting its ancient roots, often views the material world and the spheres as a sort of prison, a cosmos that is beautiful but also binding. The goal is to escape the circles of the rulers, to return to the Father. In contrast, the Urantia book views the universe as a vast, friendly, and purposeful bureaucracy. The spheres are not traps to be escaped, but campuses to be enjoyed. The Urantia book authors go to great lengths to describe the celestial artisans, the reversion directors, who provide spiritual recreation, and the mansion world teachers. While the hermeticist might see the ascent as a lonely mystical flight of the alone to the alone, the Urantia student sees it as a social, communal, and administrative progression through a well-ordered cosmic civilization. Now, I'm just thinking, could it be possible that whatever entity helped Hermes actually only had a slice of the overall big picture? Or perhaps, could these messages have been distorted over the millennium? And lastly, perhaps this statement could be true, and the notion that, in the end, it is one being overall that's re-experiencing or re-expressing itself. Furthermore, the sevenfold nature of reality in the Urantia book extends to the very composition of the grand universe. Paper 15 describes the 7 superuniverses that circle the central eternal universe of Havona. Each superuniverse has a distinct personality based on the nature of the master spirit who presides over it. This mirrors the astrological underpinnings of Hermeticism, where each of these 7 rulers imparts a specific quality to the soul as it passes through their domain. Whether it is the Mars of the Hermeticist or the Master Spirit number 7 of her super universe, the underlying message is the same. The universe is a prism, and the white light of the one is intentionally refracted into 7 colors so that we, the finite creatures, can learn to see the beauty of the whole by studying the parts individually. As the soul moves beyond the local system and the 7 mansion worlds, it enters the constellation and universe stages of the journey. In the Urantia book, this includes passing the 70 training worlds, and then hundreds of specialized spheres. This is the 8th sphere of the Hermeticists, expanded into an almost infinite atlas of education. The goal of this long-form narrative is the same in both: the preparation of the soul for the embrace of the Father. The Hermeticist seeks to be merged into God, and the Urantia pilgrim seeks the paradise embrace. In both cases, the journey is not a reward for being good, but a necessary evolution for being real. As the Urantia book states in paper 1, the Father's presence is the ultimate goal of all who have become spirit conscious. Both texts serve as divinely revealed revelations to the mortal. However, in Hermes' defense here, if you follow the internal history of the texts, they claim to be the records of the Zep Tepi, the first time of Egypt, which would place their wisdom at over 5,000 years old. Plenty of time for oral traditions to have their distortions take hold. However, the physical manuscripts themselves generally run to around 100 CE, eerily close to the times of Jesus Christ Michael. While both sources share a skeleton, their skin can appear very different. Hermeticism is a cult meant to be hidden and decoded by a few, whereas the Urantia book is revelatory, It wants to be a public, scientific, theological framework for the modern world. However, it has been my experience that the Urantia book itself is shielded to the disinterested, while it is mildly embraced by those who feel its pull. In the end, the Hermes material often feels like a series of mystical poems, while the Urantia papers feels like a celestial textbook. Thank you again for watching today's video. Your continued support, and I'll see you on the next one.